Today is September 25th, 2008. My name is Deb Lawrence, and we are here with Viola and Dick Ramp, part of the Whitley County Oral History Project. And we thank you for coming in to talk to us. We understand you're both natives of Whitley County.
Natives of Whitley County.
And what township were you brought up in?
Columbia Township.
Both of you?
Both of us.
And where did you go to grade school?
I went to Columbia City, what's Marshall building now, all 12 years. I lived with about a half a block from school.
Really?
So we waited till the last bell rang and run down the alley to the school. Dick lived different places in Columbia City. He lived out and went to Columbia City School to start with. Mary Raber was his first grade teacher. And then he went to, they moved around, but they were still in Columbia Township.
Mm-hmm.
And he went to the Schrader Schoolhouse for 2 or 3 years. And
now, where is that located?
That is south on State Road 9 at, is that 400 South? I think it is. I think it's 400 South. It's been made into a residence. Yeah.
Okay.
Made into a residence now. And then they moved over in the Quessy area, and he went to Quessy for how many? The rest of grade school?
Yeah, the rest of grade school.
And then they moved back toward Columbia City, and he went to the South Side School. McClellan School.
Mm-hmm.
And then on into Columbia City to high school. And he graduated from the high school in Columbia City.
Very cool. What was it like having Mrs. Raber for a teacher?
The best person I ever met.
Really?
Yes, it was.
Really?
She took good care of me.
Good deal.
My first grade teacher was, and I forgot, I started in the half year.
Mm-hmm.
Because there were kids I went to Sunday school with that were going, and Mom always said I thought I had to go to school with those girls. And so then I had trouble with my ears and had to miss school, so then I had to start over. And then I had Mrs. Raber.
Well, how
Or Miss
neat.
Raber, yeah.
Very cool. So you both pretty much lived in town?
Yeah. I was always in town.
Mm-hmm.
Because my maiden name was Binder, and my folks had the meat market downtown.
Ah.
And Dick's dad worked at the woolen mill, so they were various places at one time they moved up to, was it Elkhart?
Elkhart.
And did you go to school up there? Was
No.
that just like in the summer or something? They were
No,
up
wasn't old enough.
Oh, okay, that was before they were old enough. They lived in Elkhart.
So you know about a few of the businesses that aren't in operation right now, like the meat market and the woolen mill. What were those like?
Well, Binders was basically a meat market.
Mm-hmm.
They had a small farm outside of town. What direction is it?
Well, out there with
It's beyond where the 4-H fairground is now.
where Jackson lived.
And they butchered large animals out there.
Mm-hmm.
And the small animals that they used for meat at the meat market were butchered in the back end of the store.
Right there in town?
Right there in town.
Wow.
Calves and lambs and...
Oh, not just chickens, calves and...
Yeah.
Oh, my.
Small. But then the hogs and the bigger cow animals or beef animals were butchered out on that little farm that they had where they had the place to do it.
Now, did they raise their own?
No.
Just people brought them in?
Yeah, people brought them in and they bought them.
Now, where was this located? Where was the meat market located?
what's the street? It's Van Buren Street, the 100 block of Van Buren Street, and right now the travel agents is there.
Okay.
It's like 112, I think, West Van Buren.
Okay, so right there where the travel agency is now.
Yeah, right where the travel agency is now, was the meat market. And then just to the south was Jones's Bakery, which isn't there anymore. And just to the north, no, I guess it would be east and west. To the west was a business that sold automotive parts, and then Coleman's Automotive Parts, so I'm sure that was the name of it. And then to the west of that was Jantz's Grocery Store.
Uh-huh.
And then down on the block, at the east end of the block, where Chauncey Street and Van Buren meet, was Flox's department store. Flox's department store. And none of those places are there. And then there was a little cubby hole in there that was called Red's Place, I guess. They sold pop and stuff for kids after school, and I guess we could get sandwiches in there. But a little sandwich shop.
So what kinds of things would you do after school or on the weekends?
Oh, we just hung around with our friends, and there was always school activities going on. Dick wasn't involved in sports a whole lot, and I wasn't either. But they didn't have the girls' sports like they do now. They were just interactive things within the school. They didn't go other places and play basketball. We wore the awfulest, baggiest looking things for gym class and for basketball. And basketball for girls was divided into 3 sections. You had a forward and a guard, and in the middle was a center. And you didn't move out of those places.
Really?
The ball had to be thrown from this place to the center to the forward in order for there to be a basket made.
Oh, for goodness sake. So were you like, if you weren't into sports, were you in band or choir or?
I was in the choir. I was in what they called Sunshine Society. I'm not sure whether they have it anymore or not. But I was in choir. I was helped with the Eagle newspaper one semester. And then it was just the general things that your classes did together.
What about social activities in the community, like 4-H or?
You weren't ever in 4-H,
No.
were you?
I had farm work to do.
You were too busy to be in 4-H.
Yeah.
And to help these folks around the places that they lived. And I was in 4-H a year or two. I wasn't very active in it for any long time like the kids are nowadays. But the one thing that I did enjoy doing in the summertime when they started Camp Whitley, I got to go to Camp Whitley the very first year I was old enough, and every year after that until I got to be 14 or 15 years old, and then you didn't go to Camp Whitley anymore. You were in high school then, but I always enjoyed Camp Whitley. And at that time, the boys had the early summer weeks, and the girls had a couple weeks late in August before school started. And they took all ages. The younger girls went the first week, but if you were going to go for 2 weeks, which I always did, but then the older girls came the second week that couldn't go for 2 weeks. But,
very cool.
and then it was, I suppose it was expensive at the time, but looking back on it now, it was like something like $3 a week. And then if your parents were asked to bring something to serve in the kitchen, and since my folks had the meat market, my dad always took a big slab of bacon up. So they'd had, and then they came on in the middle of the week for a potluck supper, and we all took part in that.
Oh, that sounds like fun.
I know one year when my sister was little, well, she was maybe just started to school, but she had these long blonde curls that you had to wrap on rags to keep them curly. Although her hair was curly, she didn't need that much help with it, but it just always made them look nicer. She wanted to stay when they came at the middle of the week, and Madge Everhart was the camp director at the time, and she finally says, okay, Marilyn can stay, but she stayed in the cabin with the camp director. But then we went for a walk the next day, and she got into some burrs with stuff in her hair, and then I got the job to comb all those burrs out of her hair.
Oh, that
was one of the fun.
Golly.
And it usually, the girls' weeks at camp usually run over Old Settlers Day. And a lot of the girls went home for Old Settlers Day, because it was just one day back then. It wasn't the 4 or 5 days like it is now.
Oh, yeah?
And it was always in August, and it was always the third Thursday in August. And I always, if you wanted to, you could stay over and miss Old Settlers Day, but you could stay at camp. And I like to be at camp, so I stayed at camp a lot of the times through the summers that I was able to go.
Well, if Old Settlers Day was just the one day, what kind of things did they do for that? Just
Well,
one day?
the things that they do on Thursdays was like what Old Settlers Day was. They came in with a carnival and set up on Tuesdays, and they opened it up for you to go downtown on Wednesday night, and then all day Thursday, and by Friday it was gone. But then it got to the point, as I understand, that they couldn't get good, clean carnivals to come in for that short a period. So then they merged with the American Legion for the Old Settlers several days like they have it now. And the reason they move it around different times is because they seem to like the one carnival company, and they have Old Settlers when they can get that carnival company. It's the way I understand it, so.
But they registered the Old Settlers?
Yeah, they still registered the Old Settlers.
Did you have picnics and stuff, or it was
Well,
just pretty much
we lived in town, so Mom and Dad would let us, we could go downtown, and we had to go to the meat market. And my grandfather and Uncle Ed Binder, who was mayor in 1948, run the meat market. And we as kids went in there, and they gave us some money. And then we went down and we did our riding, and then, of course, we were always out of money, but then we had to go back to the meat market and get some more money. That's the way they kept track of us. That way we didn't spend all day someplace.
No cell phones to say where you're at. It's just when you run out of money, come back.
No, but that was always one of the ways that my folks kept track of us for Old Settlers Day.
So, let's see. Did they have any big Christmas festivals or 4th of July or anything, or just pretty much just the Old Settlers?
I think pretty much Old Settlers was I think that various churches in town had their Christmas parties and did express the holiday in the way that their particular churches wanted to do it. But as far as like the program around the courthouse like they have now, there wasn't any of that then.
Okay. So,
and I don't think Dick's folks, did you get to come to Old Settlers Day?
Yeah, I was around Old Settlers.
I know they always had the theater downtown had a free show in the morning for kids. But we never went to that show because my folks said, you get to go to the show most any time you want to. You aren't gonna take up seats for somebody that can't go other times, so that's the way they work that.
Okay. So after you graduated high school, did you get jobs, or have you, how long have you been?
Richard and I met one another down, I was about a sophomore in high school, and he was probably a senior in high school, at the roller skating rink, and we roller skated. We didn't dance, we roller skated,
Mhm.
and we're pretty good at it.
I think so.
Well, good.
But,
And that's where Happy Valley is
yeah,
now,
where
it's always
Happy
been
Valley
there?
is now, and it was the wooden floor with wooden sides up, maybe 4 feet, and then it was a tent. And
Ah.
then I
My
don't
mother
know.
was there.
Yeah, my mother and dad used to go roller skating, but then when they built it into a building, Mom always said it seemed like they shortened the floor up. It was just that this outside part wasn't there anymore, and it just seemed shorter to her. So after they covered it, then my folks didn't go very much anymore. I don't think they ever went anymore. But people think I'm kind of strange, I guess, when I said my mother and dad used to roller skate, but they did, and
Well, there's nothing wrong with that.
it was a fun thing to do as a family. And
So that's how you spent most of your dates then,
yeah,
was roller skating?
most of them, either there, if Dick had a car, we went maybe to Fort Wayne or to Huntington. They had roller skating rinks too, and we even went a little farther afield than that, didn't we? To Bluffton maybe? Did we ever skate in Bluffton? I think we probably
I
did.
think so. I got records of it.
We've got a book with a lot of the sticker-like things that you put on your car window or your car bumper from different skating rinks that we've been at. He was just
Oh,
going
nice.
through a book straightening those out the other day. But Dick's family was mother and dad, and he had a sister Eloise and a brother Jack, and then Dick came along, and then he had a brother Don and a sister that died as a baby, and then he had Martha and Nancy and Bill.
My goodness.
And then his brother Don was killed in World War II, and so it made kind of like two families. The three kids were younger, and Dick and Jack and Eloise were older, and it always just seemed like two families of kids. And my folks, I was the oldest, and then my brother Bob, and then 7 years after I was born, they had Marilyn. And my sister and I are the only ones left anymore. She lives outside of Sarasota in Florida. And Dick has two sisters and a brother left. And his brother Bill lives in Fort Wayne. He never had a family of his own. He never married. And so we're thinning out like all families do.
I believe we've got some of Dick's relatives in the Veterans
Probably.
celebration.
Probably.
So what was it like in Columbia City during World War II? Were there strict rationing? Did you save?
Yeah, we had rationing books, and when I was still in high school, they started that, and they took some of us that were in some of the commercial courses, typing and shorthand and things like that, out to the various places where they registered people for their ration books. And a good many years later, when we were going through some of Richard's things and some of my things, we found Richard's family's ration books with my name on it. I had signed his family up for their ration book.
Oh, isn't that something?
We thought that was real neat to have found those
Yeah.
ration books with my name on them. and now I'm part of the family. And
That's pretty good.
It was really, I'm sure Dick wasn't there, but his mother and dad came and got the books for all of the kids, and my name turned up on there.
So each member of the family had a book?
And you had so many points. You could use a sugar ration coupon. You had rations for gasoline. You had rations for shoes. And of course the things in the grocery store were all rationed. And we were very fortunate as a family because of the meat market. So we were very fortunate that way. We weren't limited like a lot of people were. But I know now, after you hear other people talk, how fortunate we were.
So did people in town like save tin or steel?
Yeah, and you saved all the old grease, and that went off to make something. And they gathered up a lot of stuff that they had around the courthouse. Didn't they take one of the big guns and?
Yeah, I got pictures of that.
Big guns that they had on, and put that in the scrap drive.
Wow.
And so everybody was very conscious of what was going on, because most every family had somebody serving in the military. And Dick had a friend that was, other than his brother being killed, he was killed in France. When they went in at D-Day, and then they were on the roadways, and then somebody had gone back to a swimming place and got in trouble and got into some landmines, and then they asked for volunteers to go bring those fellas out. So Donnie was on one end of the stretcher and got hit in the forehead with a sniper fire, and he was killed then. And then he was buried in France, and then in the early 50s he was brought back home, and he was buried out at Nolt Cemetery now.
And Nolt is?
Off of Washington Road.
Okay.
You go out 205 to Washington Road, and then it's that cemetery that's close there.
Okay.
And one of the things that we thought was nice, for a good many years, there were flowers showed up on Donnie's grave every Memorial Day. And Dick never could find out where those flowers came. It wasn't from the family anywhere. I mean, it could have been, his older sister or older brother, but everybody said no, they didn't do that. And we found out later that Glenn Frank
Just died.
Frank's greenhouse. No, he's still alive.
No, I don't think so.
Yes, he is. He's over at Oak Point. He's over at the Oaks.
I know he is, but I think he just died, didn't he?
No, that was another Frank.
Okay,
That was Dale Frank.
okay, that's right.
But Glenn Frank, who had the greenhouse
They're on South Line
on
Street?
South Line Street, and he was in Donnie's class in school, and he saw to it that there were flowers at that cemetery plot every year for almost 15 years after the war was over.
Just makes you feel a sense of
Yeah,
community, doesn't
yeah.
it? That's pretty neat.
It was something that we were very appreciative of, and he did it very incognito, so we didn't learn about it until a long time afterwards.
That's precious. Can you tell us a little bit about the woolen mills, Dick?
She probably knows about as much as I do.
He's just not talked very well anymore, and he was in the service. He went in 1943. He was sent to St. Petersburg, Florida for basic training, and they had them in tents out on a parcel of land where it was all sand, just like most of Florida is, and they didn't have what you would call regular facilities to use. It was basically a trench was dug, and
boy.
that was the bathroom facilities they had. They wound up, a lot of them getting sick, so they went into St. Petersburg and cleaned out 3 hotels, told everybody to go home, and moved this Army brigade into the hotels. And he was in 2 different ones in St. Petersburg, and then they marched up and down the streets where it was nice and places to march. So,
And you were married at that time?
not yet then.
Not yet?
Not yet then. That was in 1943, and I was in high school.
Mm-hmm.
And I graduated in 1943, and I went to work for General Electric, working on parts for airplanes. And then at Christmas that year, he came home, and that's when we decided to get married. And I went to, he was being stationed in Oklahoma at the Will Rogers Air Force Base,
Right. That's right.
outside of Oklahoma City. And I rode, my mother went with me to Chicago, and then I got on the train in Chicago for Oklahoma City, and it was straight through. Took about 24 hours to get there. And I had my mother's sister's husband, who was Paul McLean, was in the Navy at the time at Great Lakes. And so, and Aunt Sarah was in Chicago with him. And they all came to the train station, and when Paul saw all the confusion with all of the military in the train station and everything, he says, "Come on, I gotta get you on the train, so you got a seat." So he took my suitcase in one hand and me by the other hand, and we went through the serviceman's entrance, and he found me a seat on that train, so I'd be able to sit down on that trip.
Oh, boy.
And so I was fortunate to have somebody like that
Mhm.
close at hand. And I got on the train, and I sat there until about 3 o'clock in the morning, when I finally had to get up and
Oh,
find the bathroom.
boy. So,
But then Dick met me in Oklahoma City, and that was on Thursday, and we had met. Of course, he knew the fella and his wife from Indianapolis that were going to stand up with us, and I had met him just briefly at Christmas time. And he had us a efficiency apartment type in a place there in Oklahoma City. There were a couple other Air Force couples. You were Air Force by then, weren't you? And
you're good. Checking time.
I got on Thursday, and we stayed all night with one of the other couples. And then we were married on Friday. And it so happened that I've always belonged to the Grace Lutheran Church in Columbia City, and he run down a Lutheran minister on the base out there. So we were married by a Lutheran minister at the base on Friday then, which was March the 10th, 1944. And then his birthday was March the 12th. 1944, and he was 21 years old. And so, but he had leave time over the weekend, so we had to make the best use of the time. And his mother wasn't very happy that we weren't married on his birthday, but she didn't understand the military way of life.
You gotta do it when you can do it.
And
sure.
And then they had a little reception for us at the base with all the fellas that was in his unit, and some of them had their wives there. The gal from Indianapolis was there, and a couple of other gals were there, and then they had a real bang-up party at the apartment house that night. So we had quite a time, and I was in Oklahoma then until. That was March, and in May then they sent Dick to Fort Myers, Florida for gunnery training. He was going to be a gunner in a bomber airplane. And so then I came back to Columbia City and went to work for Magnavox in Fort Wayne.
Did they make war effort things
War
as
effort
well?
parts too, yeah.
Yeah. Were there a lot of ladies in Columbia City that would work?
Oh yeah, there were a lot of people worked in the factories then because they'd taken all the men away.
Mm-hmm.
The big share of them. There were a lot of ladies there, girls, and I worked there until September. His brother was killed in August, and we'd gotten the word for that, but his mother insisted that we not tell Dick until I got out there in September. By that time, they had moved him to Boise, Idaho.
Boy, they bounced you all over the place,
I
didn't
had fun.
And so then we found out he was pretty upset with all of us. Of course, he was upset because he lost his brother, but he was upset because he thought maybe the Red Cross could have got him a pass home, so he could have been with his mother. And but that wasn't what she wanted to do. Of course, we didn't think about that. We didn't know how things worked then, and but we did what she wanted done, and then we were in Idaho for over Thanksgiving, I think it was, and I came back to Columbia City, and he was sent to, was it Kansas? Is that where you made up your airplane?
No, it was
In Idaho?
Idaho.
Okay, they put together a crew for a B-24 bomber in Idaho, and that's what he went overseas to be, in a B-24.
Now that's a big one, right?
Yeah, upper turret
At that
gunner
time.
at that time, yeah.
Mhm.
The B-29 came after that, which was bigger, but this was the one that had the two tail
Mm-hmm.
business on him. And then he came home and was home just a while before Christmas. So we had Christmas while he was home that year. And then he went back, and they sent him out to the East Coast, and they were afraid he'd be on that boat going over for Christmas, so they had Christmas again. So then he had Christmas on the boat.
Well, my
And
goodness.
Then they got him
7 days across the Atlantic.
and but then when they got to England, it was still not Christmas yet, so he got to his base by the time it was Christmas, and they had Christmas then on the base. But their groups were all crews to replace fellas that were shot down when they had that Pulaski raid, which was such a bad one. And Dick said there was only one crew left in the barracks, which held 4 or 5 crews. Did your barracks hold that many crews?
It's probably 8.
Probably 8. There was only one crew left, so 7 new crews had to go in, and that's about 12 fellas to a crew.
Wow.
And so that's getting us into World War II now.
Mm-hmm.
And he had 20 full missions
Formation.
on this B-24 bomber over Germany and France. And then the war was declared over, VE Day, in England, and they sent them back with the idea that they train on B-29s to go to the Pacific theater of war. But while he was training in Texas, they got that part of the war over, so he didn't have to go anymore. He came home then in December of 19.
And then what did he go into when he came back?
Well, he went back to work for the woolen mill, because he had worked for the woolen mill before he went into the service. So he went back to work for them, and then a friend of ours started a tractor store, Ford tractor. He sold, Carl Anderson sold Ford tractors, and Dick went to work as a mechanic for Carl.
So were you a mechanic at the woolen mills, or did you?
No, the woman was closed then.
Oh, it was closed then. What type of things did they do at the woolen mills, though?
Well, made blankets and stuff for the servicemen.
Made wool cloth for uniforms
Ah.
and for car upholstery.
Ah.
And then when they went to a lot of synthetic things, then that kind of put the woolen material out of business. And so they...
And that was there on Main Street?
Yeah, on Main Street.
Right in the railroad track.
Right by the railroad tracks?
Yeah.
And the Bluebell was right behind it.
Yep. I worked there.
Golf. What was the name of the place before Bluebell?
Well, they made overhauls too.
Yeah, I know, that's where Bluebell came from.
I can't think what the name of it was.
But that had a,
Yeah.
Globe Superior.
Globe Superior was the
Right.
name of it, yeah.
so that building where Bluebell was, pretty much always was a clothing factory.
Yes, uh-huh. And I worked at, when he came home, then we had bottom part of a house. We lived on Line Street. And that's where we were at when our daughter was born in 1946. And then when she was about 2 years old, then he was still working at the woolen mill, and he'd work on weekends and for my dad at the meat market. And then I went to the woolen mill and worked for a while until they really closed down. And then he went to Anderson's,
Yeah.
and I went to Ion Capacitor.
And where's that?
That was on Radio Road between 205 and 9.
Police
At
station.
one time, it had been a state police post.
Really?
And
That's
then,
right.
then,
Don't think really.
No, I didn't realize there had been a state police
There
post.
was.
and
She's telling the truth.
then Bob Brennan and Barry Brennan took that building and made ion capacitor out of it. We made parts for speaker systems. And that was, I worked there until 1975 when it was closed. And then one of the men that had been a manager there for a while started a similar place in Fort Wayne. And I went over then to work for Allen in Fort Wayne and worked there. It was called Capacitor Technology. And worked there until I was old enough to retire. And then Dick worked for Carl for, 4 or 5 years?
11 years.
11 years. And then he went to the post office. And in 1984, he retired as a window clerk at the post office.
You were a window clerk, you weren't a rural carrier or anything?
No,
you were
well,
just-
I've done both of them, rural carrier and state carrier. But it was, when
Mostly
somebody
at
was
the-
sick, I
Ah.
carried mail and also took rural carrier job when he was sick and delivered mail off of out of my car.
Ah, okay.
But basically, he was a window clerk.
But used to, it was all rural route, and then they changed to actually having numbers on the,
Addresses, yeah.
Well, did that make it easier, do you suppose?
Well, it made it more simpler, not easier.
Oh, let's see, where are we?
Where did your daughter go to school?
Our daughter went, first we moved from town out to, up on the hill between Shriner and Little Cedar Lake.
Oh, so
And she went first grade to Thorn Creek. And then we bought a little farm out on State Road 14, and she went the rest of her grade school years to Washington Center.
that was after Washington Center wasn't a high school anymore.
There was it wasn't a high school anymore. And then she went into Columbia City, basically to the new school. It was a new school about that time. And her class was the first full 4-year class out of that new school.
Oh,
when Columbia
very
City was
neat.
built. So then after Dick had retired in '84, and I retired 3 years later, which would have been '87, I guess. And we decided, we lived south of town then on about 3 acres, and it was getting to be more than we could take care of. And so we sold that property and went to Florida
Oh,
for basically 10 years. First couple years we just went down in the winter time, and then the rest of the time after we sold the house we were down there permanent. And in 1998 we came back home.
yeah, no
was
place
back
like home, right?
Paula lived up by Angola and drove back and forth from Angola to Fort Wayne to work every day. But because I said to her when we came home from Florida, where do you want us? Because I thought maybe someplace between. She says, no, Mom, she says, you and Dad know Columbia City, you belong in Columbia City. So we were at the Simonsons apartments for a year, and then we bought a house in that addition, which is right behind Richard's Restaurant.
Oh,
And we were in the house right behind Richard's Restaurant.
that's changed as well.
Yeah. And we were there until, let's see, this is 8, 7, 6. 2005, we sold our property and moved out to Oak Point, which is a residential apartment facility connected with Parkview Hospital, connected to the Oaks Nursing Home. And we have a very nice apartment out there. And we went into a 1-bedroom, 1-bathroom apartment, and we're fortunate enough to have the lady that lived next to us after her husband passed away wanted to go back to Warsaw, where she was from. So she gave up her apartment and moved back to Warsaw, and we got to move in
You
her.
got a bigger place.
Got a bigger place, and so we have a nice 2-bedroom, 2-bathroom, 2 more closets. That's the main
That's the
thing.
good thing, sure.
And so we're very comfortable where we're at now.
So, well, let me think what I've got here. Can you think of any favorite hangouts or any place you two like to go out to dinner or anything that might not be here anymore?
Well, the 30 Club isn't here anymore.
Mm-hmm.
That was one of the nicest places in Columbia City. When you had something very special that you wanted to celebrate, you always went to the 30 Club, which was on the east side of town. Then they moved it over on the 30 when they put the 30 bypass around. And basically then it moved into where, it's something else now, but it was Clementine's for a long time. But I'm not sure what they call it now. They've got a new owner there.
Yeah.
And, of course, we've always been McDonald people. when we were living in the house and we had to get all 3 of our meals, a lot of times we went to McDonald's.
Yeah.
And but there were basically 30 Club was the nice place in town to go. We didn't go to many of the other restaurants. After our daughter and her second husband were married, he liked to go to the place downtown that used to be Rhodes' Pool Hall. It's right there on the alley beside a Star Bank.
Oh, it used to be called the Alley.
Yeah.
And now it's Northside Grill.
Northside Grill.
But that was a pool hall at one
Yeah,
point.
that was.
Pool room upstairs and car room downstairs. And a hide, a place where people could go gambling,
Yeah.
Oh,
secret place.
a secret place.
Nobody supposed to know that room was up there. I've
Ah,
been in there.
But, and it wasn't a place that ladies went.
ah,
It was strictly a men's retreat type of thing. And it was run by a man by the name of Jess Rhodes
mm-hmm.
And his
And-
brother,
and his brother.
right?
And, but it was around when we were kids growing up.
Mhm.
And once in a while, some of the boys would sneak in, I guess. I mean, I never, wasn't something I even thought about, but,
Now boys will be boys. How long was your family's meat market in place?
yeah, wait a minute. I should have kept. My great-grandfather, Frederick G. Binder, came to Whitley County in 1874. He first worked for Fred Bush and then 8 years later for Daniel Brothers in Columbia City. In 1885, he opened his own butcher shop, and it was there. Now, back in the beginning, I got the wrong address. It's 221 West Van Buren. It's in the
Ah,
second block
the
instead
second
of the
block.
first block. And it was a meat market until 1952, when my father closed it because of places like Kroger's were putting in a meat department, and they had another grocery in town that put a meat market in, and that the specialty stores just couldn't manage anymore. So
this was established back before most people had electricity
Yeah.
or anything, so they had big coolers and stuff to put the meat in, or?
this is, you've probably seen this picture around, but this is the meat market when
Here, let's see if we can get it up.
it was.
And we'll get a better shot of this. There we go. That's pretty neat.
This is my grandfather, and this is his brother, Ed Binder. And I don't know what year this picture was taken, but Uncle Ed was mayor in 1948. And I don't think no, this is before my dad was even old enough to be in the business, because, see, that street isn't even paved.
Mm-hmm. Now,
And-
did they make deliveries, or was that
Yeah,
just
yeah,
someone
that's what
coming
it
up
was.
to?
No, that was their delivery vehicle.
That's very cool. So clear up till 1952, that's a
Yeah.
good long while to have
And,
a business.
Then my brother Bob worked for Dad in the meat market for a while. And then when my brother was married, then they moved to Huntington, and he lived down in Huntington then, and we lost him in 1969. And we lost him in the middle of June on 1969, and our first grandchild was born later on the 25th of June in 1969.
Oh my.
And our grandson that was born in 1969 has just in this last June retired from 20 years in the Navy.
Wow, that's wonderful.
And he and his wife have moved back to Whitley County.
Always got to come back home.
Well, she was from California, but her father worked for the California Park Rangers. And so she had lived up in the mountains and was used to the changes of the seasons, and she wanted to come back to Whitley County with
Oh,
Joe.
great.
And so
Great.
they're both have finally found a little bit of work to do. It's just in the last few days, and so we're awful glad to. hung on until we could have Joe around for a while.
Sure.
And it's been so nice to have him come home.
Now, you mentioned the 30 bypass. Think that made a whole lot of difference in the community?
Well, it was supposed to be a bypass, but then it got to be a business section.
Pretty much, huh?
Pretty much business section. And I think it was to alleviate, because US 30 went right straight down Van Buren Street
Mm-hmm.
and turned at Main Street and went out that way.
Mm-hmm.
And because it went, for a long time, it went right by the front door of the house that I lived in as a kid on Van Buren Street.
Oh my. Bet
Big
that was...
semis would stop out in front at night and change a tire. And,
Oh my.
and but then they brought it into town. Did you come down Elm Street? Back of the school?
Yeah,
Come down back of the school and then went through town.
The Marshall Middle School?
Yeah. And then they needed to get it out of town, and that's why they put the bypass in.
Which, as you said, isn't really a
Mhm.
bypass. Okay, we're just about out of time. Anything else different about Whitley County, for better or for worse?
well, one of the better things, there was 3 or 4 different businesses this long years ago.
Mm-hmm.
Like their buggy factory was here in
Mhm.
Columbus City, and also the
Well, there was a Rexall drugstore downtown. Thompson's car store,
Yeah.
Thompson's automobile store was downtown. The woolen mill's gone.
Mm-hmm.
There was a root beer barrel out on the east side of town. I think that's where I had my first job.
Oh,
And then it turned into be the Dairy Queen, and it was on the east side of town. Now it's over on the other side of town. Russia's had a dress shop downtown. Let's see, about, well, where that restaurant is, that Northside Grill,
mm-hmm.
and then across the alley, about the middle of that block, that would be the 100 block.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't get to be east and still it crosses Main Street.
Mm-hmm.
So it would have been 100 block west. The dress shop was at. And of course McLean and Osball isn't there on the corner anymore.
That was a mainstay for forever.
And then on the corner where Eslick's Insurance is was a department store called Flox's Department Store.
I used to get my embroidery right there.
And I thought, well, what I always thought was so neat about that store was they had these overhead things that they put your receipt and your money in, and they put it in, and it went up to the ceiling, went across to a balcony where their cash registers were, and they made the change, and then it came shooting back down that thing and down that thing to where they started.
Oh,
I always thought those were the neatest things to watch.
That
when I
would have
went
been
into
fun.
that store.
That would have been fun.
And anything else we wrote down? Well, of course, Anderson Ford Tractor isn't around anymore.
And where was that here in town? Or
Yeah,
was it?
that was, well, he started out on Main Street, about where that diner business is now.
Uh-huh.
And then he moved over to where the plumbing business is, just beyond 9 and 30, where 9 goes south.
Okay.
And that Quonset hut type of building
Mhm.
was, Anderson put that up for the Ford Tractor Agency.
Oh, that's where Flowtech's at.
Flowtech's at now,
Yeah.
yeah. Oh, and the one other thing, when you were talking about clubs and things that we were in, Richard's been in the Historical Society for about as long as he was ever able to be in, and in 1971 he was president of the Whitley County Historical Society.
Marvelous.
That's
And
right.
the year he was president of the Historical Society, I was worthy matron at Eastern Star. So
Well,
we have been.
you are busy.
We have been busy through our lives.
All righty.
And Dick belonged to, at one time, he belonged to the Odd Fellows out of the Laud chapter.
Mm-hmm.
We lived down on State Road 14, and he belonged to the Odd Fellows down there for a while, and he belonged to the Eagles Lodge for a while. But the main thing is that he was president of the Historical Society in 1971.
Marvelous.
And also, the other lodge.
Eagle,
No, across the street from the Eagles.
oh, he was in the Masonic Blue Lodge. He was in the Masonic Blue Lodge. And Ned wasn't an officer there, but he was president of the
And
Whitley County.
they actually have the cornerstone of that
Mhm.
building, don't they?
That's right.
Mhm.
So, well, thank you very much for your time, and we
If-
appreciate you coming to talk to us.
Anytime if you're interested in any of the postcards about Columbia City
Mm-hmm.
or any of that kind of stuff, just give us a call and come out, because we just don't let those things get
Oh,
out of our
heavens,
sight.
no, I will be giving you a call when we bring the
Okay,
camera out.
there's the Columbia City postcards, there's the postcards on Tri-Lakes and Larwell and South Whitley.
Oh,
And we have some on Laud, some on Colomer.
Wow.
And then he has a book that's got not quite all of the Old Settlers Day postcards and the ribbons.
How wonderful, yes, we will
And
be tapping
if
you
you'd
for
like to
that.
see those, and we can take pictures of anything you want, but we just don't let those get out of our
No,
sight.
no. Well, thank you so much, and we will be talking to you again.